First, I want to thank to Professor Asunción López Varela for inviting me today. I work in Mexico at the University of Veracruz, and I work on cross-cultural currents between China and Europe since the 17th to the 18th centuries. So I will talk today about transcultural dialogues between Europe and China in the 17th and 18th centuries. Okay, this transcultural phenomenon begins as a commercial adventure between Portugal, Spain, and the Far East, focused on the Philippines, China, Japan, Taiwan, and other coastal locations that will be also visited by the Dutch and finally by all the Western East Indies companies created to trade with Asia. As to Spain, it began in the 16th century as an imperialist and missionary enterprise pushed by the possibility of conquering China. Instead of it, efforts in the viability of a shipping route that sent to Spain and to the Americas the luxury items of the Far East were strengthened. Philip II left a considerable collection of Chinese porcelain formed by 3,000 pieces in 1603 and many other Asian items such as textiles, ivory statues, furniture, and Nanban art or Japanese creations for foreign consumption, among others. The Spanish crown, once reached a fixed port in Manila, preserved its trade with China en route to it, where sampans and vessels coming from all over the Pacific coast reached the port with their precious cargoes. Inevitably, this flow of goods, tangible and intangible heritages, people, knowledges and ideas between East and West since the 16th century will lead both civilizations toward a partial absorption of the other and to produce hybrid expressions in art and culture. Thus, we will speak first of the impact of China toward Europe, which will begin in the aesthetic of everyday life, mainly through decorative arts such as porcelain, furniture, and so on. Western customers consumed Chinese porcelain, mostly the type produced for export, which in Europe were often catalogued by color and in China considered of lower quality. Besides, Europeans asked for specific models done in Chinese factories for their own taste. For example, China ware with heraldic motifs and Western models. This passion for all things Chinese gave birth to a great vogue named chinoiserie, or good Anglo-Chinois, taking over the European court's taste of kings and courtesans during the 17th and 18th centuries. Chinoiserie and Japan creations are well represented in Spanish palaces, as we can check in La Casa del Labrador, House of the Peasant, in the Royal Palace of Aranjuez. This emplacement and Royal Palace at Madrid, or Palacio de Oriente, together with Palace of San Ildefonso de la Granja, have the best examples of the Chinese style during the Rococo era at Spain. Here we can see different Asian or Chinese style crafts, such as fashion, fans, wallpaper, and architectural features, and general items or objects in Chinese style. Besides, there were important publications related to Chinese taste, such as Chambers' works on Oriental gardening and Chinese buildings. Even literature and theater fell under the style of China, and I will give you one single case. Voltaire made a theatrical version of a popular Chinese story about an orphan, entitled L'Orphelin de la Chine, the Chinese orphan, which was part of the many versions of this story in Europe by different authors and in several languages. The original text is by Ji Zhongxiang, Zhao Shi Wu. A specific example of the globalization of China in the Western world in this period is its presence in Mexico, then known as part of the Viceroyalty of New Spain, where the Spanish Empire, by means of its galleons, united the ports of Acapulco in Mexico, Sevilla in Spain, and Manila in the Philippines. Then, a valuable part of its cargo was sold at the Viceroyalty of New Spain in fairs before reaching Veracruz, and another part was spread over these colonies in the Americas, contributing to globalize the popular knowledge about China and its culture. This Baroque fashion for Chinese items, which lasted so long and above all in the Rococo period, will lead to the development of hybrid objects that have merged with Mexican folk culture. One of the crafts impacted by Asian roots was Mexican maque, or lacquerware, which employed Chinese designs even though technique was different and already existed in pre-colonial times. This is similar to the case of Mexican works with incrustations of mother-of-pearl and marquetry, which were heavily influenced by Asian patterns. And we have a beautiful example of this hybrid aesthetics between East and West in the enconchados, or nacre inlays, considered by some experts as works of Asian artisans settled in Mexico. Of course, many Asian works arrived from India, Goa, and Japan during the Viceregal period. Other subjects are still on study and hypothesis comes around, such as the influence of China in New Spanish cockfight, or in cutting paper designs in silk paper that nowadays and then are used to decorate Mexican death altar. More areas of influence were cooking by the introduction of Asian spices and products, fashion and Chinese textiles exports became popular, highlighting clothing, shawls, stockings, fabrics, household wares, liturgical items, and decorative objects. The China poblana dress is clear proof of this mix of styles. It took elements from Asia, such as the belts, sequins, and fringe of the shawl, adapted for the indigenous rebozo, and led to a highly successful syncretic garment worn by the general populace. When it comes to lacquer furniture, while European workshops dedicated themselves to copying Oriental designs, the so-called Japanese, the Western technique was developed in 1667 at Le Gobelin in Paris, where furnishings with an Oriental flavor were produced in large quantities, examples of which are also to be found in New Spain. In the same way, wooden or lacquered folding screens are related to Japanese and Chinese craftsmen or to Oriental style. We can also find Mexican works imitating them, and finally, local productions and Hispanic scenes in Biondos. The passion for decoration of the Baroque period, combined with the impact of Catholicism on Viceregal society, led to ivory becoming one of its preferred materials. These ivories took Catholic imagery as a model, providing Oriental artisans with an iconography to work from. They do, however, bear the marks of hybridity, as the Oriental aesthetic of Buddhism and other characteristics of their production are manifested in their hieratic character, their lack of sensuality, and even in the poses and faces. Religious subjects quickly became a specialist niche for the Asian craftsmen, who comprised Indians, Filipinos, and Chinese, most of them already settled in El Parian, the Chinatown outside the walls of Manila, down on the right. It is probable that ceramics and tiles are where the influence of China was felt most strongly among colonial crowds. The Puebla pottery attempted to imitate Chinese porcelain when the chinoiserie fever was at its height. Ming and Qing porcelains were seen as the aesthetic ideals to follow, with their typical elements including herons, chrysanthemum flowers, landscapes, rocks, gardens, art bridges, pavilions, and Chinese figures. This hybridization was forged in the kilns of Puebla with the substitution of certain Chinese elements by local ones, such as inclusion of prickly pear cactus and the quetzal bird in place of flowering plum trees and the so-called Chinese phoenix or fenghuang, together with the additions made by the Spanish tradition. All related to the aesthetic of everyday life was influenced by the Far East. Asian luxury goods, out of reach of the ordinary people, made the homes and palaces of the local oligarchy a veritable pleasure to the eye. However, China's influence in the West will go beyond the aesthetic of everyday life or the hybridization of certain cultural aspects, since it will have a fundamental impact among the intellectual elites of enlightened Europe and will initiate the study of China as sinologists do. This will be possible thanks to the Republic of Letters and the world of books. Less known is that books on China share the space on bookshelves with Chinese books, published in China in its very language. The first package of Chinese books to be sent to Spain consisted in a heterogeneous number of subjects. In 1575 was due to Martín de Rada. He bought 100 Chinese books and planned to deliver them to the Spanish king. Chinese books are present in most of the Western collections, the best Western collections and libraries for centuries. On the other hand, European books made their way to China in support of the Western culture and very often were translated into Chinese right there, covering important subjects like philosophy, religion, mathematics, and so. Of course, there were written manuscripts, dictionaries, destined to help the propagandistic efforts of Catholicism in China, in diverse tongues, with great effort placed on Chinese. Moreover, the illustrated curiosity that surrounded the Enlightenment was reflected in a passion for books on China. Language, customs, society, cities, economy, geography, national laws, history, medicine, flora and fauna, philosophy and religion were frequently studied by missionaries and authors who devoted their works to the understanding of the other. This is not anecdotal. We speak of more than 1,600 titles about China between the 16th and 18th centuries. Titles, not volumes. There were also editions and bestsellers and numerous translations, like Juan de Mendoza's book. That is to say, the issue of China was of tremendous relevance in Europe and not just a passing fad. Contributions in the world of literature and philosophy reflected the European wave connecting China with intellectual elites, which started in the 17th century and became a topic reinforced by controversy and debates. Famous scholars interested on China were Leibniz, Juan Caramuel, Martino Martini, Andreas Müller, Joseph Boehm, etc. There are thousands, more than 1,000 of names or authors that wrote about China. And here we have again fascinating connections with Spain and Mexico in this process of global exchanges between East and West through books on China. For example, the so-called Illustrated China, China Ilustrata, by German Jesuit Athanasius Kircher, a bestseller of the time, read in Europe and admired by Creole elite in Mexico, including the famous poetess Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz and intellectual and polymath Carlos de Sigüenza y Góngora. Sigüenza y Góngora also met Italian traveler Giovanni Francesco Gemelli Carreri in his way back to Europe after having visited China and the Philippines, another valuable source of information about the Asian nation. This is a map of my own, of books on China present in Mexican modern libraries that arrived in colonial times. These are books that have survived to war, plundering, disasters, but there were far more 200 years ago. China was a global phenomenon, and everybody wanted to write about it, including famous religious and intellectual figures in Mexico, which was the case of the Spanish bishop Juan de Palafox y Mendoza, and his posthumous book about the conquest of China by the Tartar. Among scholars, the topics of greatest interest were religion and philosophy. For example, the so-called controversy of the Chinese rites, started by Jesuits. I will explain it a little bit. In general terms, most of the Society of Jesus in China defended the social origin of certain Chinese traditional practices such as the worship of ancestors and of Confucius, Hongzu, which were considered by other religious orders as heretical rites incompatible with the Christian faith. The origin of such a discussion on Chinese religion and philosophy was strongly present in titles on China. These publications were mostly in the hands of the Jesuits, even though the other important Catholic orders, Dominicans, Franciscans, Augustinians, also published very relevant material about it since the 16th century. Nevertheless, it was the Jesuits' order who opened a cultural bridge between East and West at the highest level and were the main providers of material about China for the Enlightenment Europe. They chose Confucius as a key figure due to the relationships between Confucianism and Chinese law, order, education, moral values, and of course, because of its influence on Chinese intellectual elite. This theory about Confucius and the culture of the other was influenced by European idiosyncrasy and sometimes worked against the correct image of China. Europe could not fully understand Chinese culture, perceiving it from its own European worldview. The lack of understanding of Chinese landscape painting is a perfect illustration of these misunderstandings. In China, it is a sacred genre rooted in Taoism that focused on the spiritual and on simplicity, while in Europe, landscape painting was full of depth, contrast, volume, movement, and realism. So Chinese manifestations were taken as a sign of the Chinese clumsiness to paint and lack of life. In China, the sober symbolic production of Chinese ink, represented in all its mastery in landscape painting, containing a calligraphy and a poem, Sanctuary, the Three Perfections, is considered the most important artistic expression proper to the emperors and great artists. This was never known in that brilliant Europe because of their ignorance about the aesthetics of Chinese painting, since Buddhism and Taoism linked to this art were objects of a strong criticism by Jesuits and Catholics. It is clear that the thirst for knowledge of Europe in those days successfully brought transcultural processes and had an everlasting impact on Western culture, but also reflected the peculiarities of a complex absorption of Asian values and styles, sometimes deformed by the European idiosyncrasy. Nevertheless, there are wonderful exceptions. Leibniz deserves a special space for his great contributions in defense of Chinese culture. He searched for a Chinese key and investigated this language in order to make it his universal philosophical characteristic. That is a universal language that was capable of transmitting philosophical truths. Discussions about the possibility that the Chinese language worked as a universal language or its links with the sacred language that God taught to Adam were also held by other Western thinkers and notable figures during the 17th and 18th centuries. When Leibniz published the results of his binary system at the Academy of Science in Paris, he assured that this was a rediscovery of the binary system contained in the ancient Chinese wisdom book, the Book of Changes, I Ching. It is an oracular book that works on the basis of continuous and discontinuous lines attributed to Fuxi, father of the Chinese writing, and an important Chinese mythological figure related to the descendants of Noah by Jesuit Joachim Bouvet and the Hermetic theories. Now, we shall use the same approach to the transfer of art and culture from Europe to China, although it was always to a much smaller degree the impact of the former on the latter than vice versa. China, like its Western counterpart, took from Europe only what interested, disdaining many Western manifestations considered as inferior to its own. The European citizens who settled among the Chinese elite and promote this cultural exchange were mostly religious, especially Jesuits, who inaugurated a fruitful era in 1601 with the arrival of the Jesuit Mateo Ricci to the court of Beijing, and its Spaniard Diego de Pantoja. This intrepid clergyman and his fellows reinforced their position vis-à-vis the emperor. They were not only part of the religious elite, but also prominent intellectuals trained in depth in science, mathematics, and many other skills, as well as knowing the Chinese language. Thanks to them and to other Westerners, European culture, science, and technology penetrated in China, contributing new knowledge or complementing others already established in the Asian country. For example, in the fields of astronomy, war devices, designing cannons, for example, architecture, that is Yuanmingyuan, Western palace designed by Jesuit Giuseppe Castiglione and others. Religion, by reintroducing and spreading Catholic faith. Clock manufacturing. Western philosophy, translated by Jesuits mostly. Cartography, that's mapped by Matteo Ricci at the beginning of the 16th, 17th century. Music, that's another Jesuit, Teodorico Perlini, etc. China also received Western novelties coming from world trade, including plants and herbs, silver, and much more. In order to a more complete view of it, we will see some samples of Western art in China, whose presence begins when Giovanni Niccolò, an Italian, opened his Western Painting Academy or seminar in Japan in 1583 until 1614, when it moved toward Macau in China. It is then that the art of oil painting, hitherto unknown in Asia, except for some works that will surely have arrived in previous commercial exchanges, begins to be practiced by a minority in Japan and later in China. One of the consequences of Western creations made in Asian soil is aesthetic hybridization, also present in works by Chinese artists converted to Catholicism. In the case of the works of the Nichols Academy, this is especially evident in the assemblies on supports of Japanese lacquer. However, where this blend of styles and Western influence is best appreciated, it is in the production of the European artists who worked for Emperor Qianlong and his predecessors in the 17th and 18th centuries, such as the famous Jesuit artist Giuseppe Castiglione, a key figure devoted to introducing Western techniques in China. In fact, special example of artistic hybridization between East and West, is his Qianlong Pingting Zhongbu Huaibu Zhang Tu, the military exploits of the Emperor Qianlong during the pacification of the Zongar and the Hui, also called the Battle Copper Prints, which is a collection of prints designed by Castiglione and other Jesuits following the Emperor's command, engraved at Paris. Here we can appreciate the similar elements to Western painting, the disproportionate sizes of the figures following Chinese standards, with a bigger emperor on the right down, and the idealized view of the orderly troops and its absence of passion and drama, as well as the Qingyuan or Chinese level distance. When the European perspective was introduced into the Chinese court by the Ricci, along with the translation of the Treaty on Perspective by Andrea Pozzo, there were all kinds of opinions. In fact, Western perspective enjoyed ambiguous protection in the imperial court during the 17th and 18th centuries. And even though some paintings, optical illusions, gardens and buildings were done following Western rules, it represented a small percentage among an imperial production dominated by traditional expressions of Chinese art. Furthermore, at some point, the Chinese emperor forced Jesuit priests to paint in the Chinese style, and usually the most traditional Chinese artists rejected Western style in their writings and public opinions because of its lack of spirit and chiaroscuro. As we can see, perception of the artistic aesthetic of the other was a problem that arose in both China and Europe. Thus, we have seen these transcultural phenomena or experiences that are not new or recent. Besides, the ignorance between cultures is a phenomenon that continues to happen and that will remain there as long as we do not take the trouble to study other civilizations. I hope that this talk will lead you to a better understanding of the topic and take advantage of it in your encounters with the Far East. Thank you.